Incredible story revealed how one black female general's courage exposed racist cops and change. Aisha Thompson stepped off the bus with a weighty mix of pride and apprehension swelling in her chest. After a decade of military service, she returned to Pine Grove, Georgia, a town that once held her dreams and ambitions in its palm. The faces of her childhood flickered in her mind, the camaraderie of family gatherings and the innocent laughter of her younger brother, Jamal, resonating in her heart. But as she navigated the narrow streets lined with shuttered storefronts and peeling paint, unease simmered beneath her resolve. Could she reclaim the warmth she once knew? Her career had forged her into a formidable leader, yet now each step felt constricted by fading memories of joy and looming threats of reality. What awaited her at home? Would she find Jamal, that bright-eyed boy who had clung to her uniform, now a young man at the mercy of the world's unrelenting shadows? As she crossed the familiar threshold of her childhood home, the smell of home-cooked meals filled her with nostalgia, igniting flickering hopes for a peaceful reunion. But serenity was fickle. Before she could even settle in, her phone erupted with an urgent call. Jamal had been arrested, wrongfully pulled over and dragged from his car like a criminal. Her heart raced, breath catching in her throat, panic coiled inside her like a viper. Aisha felt the color drain from her face. This was not the homecoming she envisioned. The very system she had devoted her life to defending had turned against her family like a catastrophic betrayal. Fear developed fangs, gnawing at her thoughts. Was she to protect her brother or safeguard her military career? She had once seen herself as a beacon of strength. Now she was faced with a gnawing dread that her service could be weaponized against her own. Clenching her fists, Aisha turned from the comforting walls of her home to confront the darker truths of her town. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Aisha dove deep into the investigation, uncovering alarming patterns of racial profiling that echoed her own childhood, suffocating dreams with palpable rage. She discovered records of misconduct buried beneath years of silence. Each revelation stoked her despair, an intricate web of injustice that enveloped her community she had sworn to protect. Trusted faces twisted into strangers, neighbors who once embraced her now wary of the noise she was making. The more determined she became, the more isolated she felt. Caught between the obligation to uphold her military oath and the fierce loyalty to her brother, Aisha was torn. Glancing at Jamal's photo, she was struck by the realization that his future, and perhaps hers, was at stake. The internal battleground was unforgiving. What was she willing to risk? Could she redefine herself? Could she bear the community's backlash for standing for her brother, all while protecting the family name? The clock was ticking, and with each passing moment the stakes grew higher, leaving Aisha with a brittle equilibrium. Would she reveal the corruption she'd unearthed, or would she retreat into the shadows, preserving her standing and risking losing her brother along with the legacy of her family? The air thickened with tension, and her next step loomed large, and tormenting choice that could tip the scales in either direction. As she stood at this precarious precipice, Aisha held the weight of an entire community's hope on her shoulders, heart racing, ready to face the unknown. The sun dipped below the horizon, stretching shadows across the familiar yet foreign streets of Pine Grove. Aisha paced her childhood living room, her heart pounding with urgency. The comforting scent of home-cooked meals now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by her deepening anxiety. With Jamal's future hanging in the balance, she needed to take action, but what that action meant was shrouded in uncertainty. Drawing from years of training and conflict management, she cleared her mind and laid out the facts. Jamal had been wrongfully arrested. She needed more than anecdotal evidence. Clenching her jaw, she recalled her education and strategies from the military, thorough analysis, methodical planning. Stepping into this ring meant employing those instincts, but could her military experience aid her within the confines of her own neighborhood, or would it create a wider rift between her and the people she longed to protect? The weight of her dual identities pressed heavily on her shoulders. As she scoured local news articles and police records, Aisha quickly mapped out a timeline of events surrounding her brother's arrest. Each piece of evidence unearthed was laced with the bitterness of betrayal. She recalled the pride she'd felt in her service, a semblance of power that seemed a world apart from her helplessness now. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed an email to a colleague still active in the military, seeking guidance on how to navigate this treacherous terrain. Would they view her as a whistleblower or as a traitor? The risk of speaking out loomed large, like a tidal wave ready to crash down on her. Deciding to consult an old mentor from her days in service gave her a flicker of hope. Lieutenant Colonel Harris had seen the worst of systems gone awry and remained unyieldingly committed to justice. Aisha reached out, desperate for encouragement. "I need your help to ensure this doesn't happen again," she typed, revealing her fears and her convictions. The reply came swiftly, but it left her feeling more entangled than before. "This isn't just about your brother, Aisha. This is about a system that needs to be dismantled. Are you prepared for the consequences?" Consequences. She stopped reading, letting the weight of his words settle within her, churning like a storm. Each syllable hung in the air, a harbinger of the personal battle she faced. That night, Aisha barely slept. The chill of grappling uncertainty gnawed at her. She replayed moments from her training. The core lessons of leadership and resilience resonated. True strength lies in action despite fear. But which action would she choose? Ignoring the system meant risking Jamal's future and her own, while revealing the truth could fracture the already tenuous connection with her community. As dawn broke, Aisha found herself at a crossroads. The morning light tantalized her with a sense of possibility. She gathered her courage and reached for her phone, contemplating attending a local community meeting. Perhaps there she could voice not only the urgency of Jamal's case, but also the larger narrative of justice intertwined with accountability. If she chose to fight for her brother, she might just galvanize those who felt marginalized too. But then a thought gripped her anew. What if confronting the powers that be only put a target on her back? What if the struggle illuminated the darker truths of Pine Grove, exposing layers upon layers of pain she once lived within without seeing? With a deep breath, Aisha stood before her reflection in the living room mirror, an officer, a sister, a daughter, and now a potential agent of change. The path lay before her, aching with uncertainty, yet dripped with promise. The moment of decision tugged fiercely at her consciousness. As Aisha contemplated her next steps, an unmistakable resolve started to crystallize within her. She would stand tall for her brother, but more importantly, she would stand for herself. Yet even as she began to formulate her plan, she knew the real fight was just beginning. Uncertainty intertwined with nascent determination, as Aisha felt the first step teetering under her resolve. Could she muster the strength to unveil the truth? Or would the very act of doing so cast shadows on her family name forever? As the day unfolded, Aisha's heart raced with anticipation of the confrontation that lay ahead, an encounter not only with her past, but with destiny itself. The time had come to face what awaited her in that community center. The community meeting was held in a worn-down community hall, its walls echoing with the whispers of stories lost to time. Stepping inside, Aisha felt the weight of the space, the air thick with unspoken histories, grievances and hopes. Rows of folding chairs were hastily arranged, occupied by faces that reflected a variety of struggles and stories, each luminous with their own urgency. As she took her seat, Aisha's thoughts raced. This was not merely about Jamal. It was about a culture of silence and fear that had long taken root in Pine Grove. The debate over law enforcement's conduct had simmered beneath the surface, and now her presence would stir it up. Would they see her as a reluctant ally or an outsider tapping into age-old wounds? The meeting began. A local activist took the mic, his voice gravelly but resolute. He spoke of errant arrests, systemic biases, and the chasm of distrust that had grown between law enforcement and the community. Aisha's mind mirrored his fervor. Here was the testament of her own observations, the collection of stories she had ignored for too long. With each point made, she felt her walls begin to crumble. This was the conversation she had avoided, yet now desperately needed. She fidgeted with the hem of her jacket, contemplating when to speak, her pulse thudding. She hadn't just come to listen, she had to contribute. Summoning her military resolve, she ascended from the shadows of indecision, rising slowly to her feet, every gaze in the room shifting towards her. The pressure tightened around her chest, yet she pressed on, ready to weave her brother's story with the broader narrative of injustice. "Aisha, what do you think?" demanded a voice from the back, summoning her ambitions to the forefront. "I want to talk about my brother," she began, centering her focus. "He was arrested for something he didn't do, and while this feels personal, it's actually connected to a pervasive system of bias that transcends individual cases." The buzz in the room shifted toward a heavy silence, the kind that demanded attention. She explained his arrest, backing it up with researched statistics on wrongful arrests in their area. "This is not just about Jamal," she continued, looking around as faces morphed from skepticism to intrigue. "It's about how justice exists, or doesn't, within our neighborhood." As she spoke, she could literally feel the energy in the room changing. Her words made connections, a lifeline for others daring to share their own pain. There were nods, murmurs, and a soft voice shouting, "Tell it, Aisha." It was as if she had ignited a dormant fire, illuminating the dark truths that lurked in the corners. However, with the energy came risk. She spotted familiar faces of local law enforcement members lingering at the edges of the room, their expressions unreadable. Would Aisha's words echo retribution? This thought gnawed at her determination, provoking flashes of her past traumas, moments spent balancing her identity as a soldier with the expectations of a sister, a daughter, a community member. But as she moved through her narrative, layers of fear peeled back, revealing an unquenchable hunger for justice. Her brother's name was more than an honor or a claim. It was a rallying cry for truth. In that moment, Aisha understood this wasn't merely about exposing a corrupt system. It was about igniting change through awareness. The applause following her was thunderous, shaking the very foundation she stood on. The thrill of having spoken her truth rallied around her, but it was swift, immediately overshadowed by a sinking dread. Would the power she had stirred turn against her? As the crowd clamored for further discussion, Aisha's heart raced. Suddenly, confrontation walked through the door. One of the officers associated with Jamal's arrest stood at the entrance, scanning the room. Aisha felt a chill descend upon her. It was now or never. Would she confront him, risking her voice now that she had begun to embrace it? Or would she retreat, letting fear dampen the spark she had ignited? With resolve melding with trepidation, Aisha stepped forward, prepared to face the shadows of her past and the authorities that sought to silence the truth. What would this confrontation reveal about the systems in place, and indeed about her own transformative journey? The clock was ticking as she steadied herself for what lay ahead. The officer stepped closer, his silhouette stark against the pale light of the hall. Aisha's breath hitched. Every retreating heartbeat pulled her deeper into the recesses of her mind, where doubt lingered like a cloud, heavy and suffocating. Yet the applause from the crowd still reverberated in her ears, a stark reminder of the strength that had nearly overwhelmed her. As he approached, Aisha braced herself, the veteran instinct kicking in to assess the situation like a battlefield. The officer, a tall man with chiseled features that betrayed no emotion, seemed surprisingly calm. Aisha zeroed in on the intensity in his eyes. Would he listen? More importantly, would he attempt to dismiss her concerns as merely those of an emotional sister rather than a thoughtful advocate? "Your testimony tonight was passionate," he said, his voice betraying nothing, "but you must understand that you're only seeing part of the picture." The words hung in the air, a challenge shrouded in professionalism. Aisha felt the energy of the crowd shift. Behind her, murmurs of support began to stir, voices rising to punctuate the tension. They believed in her, yet she felt the vulnerability creeping back in. Confidently, she stepped closer, lowering her voice to match his steady tone. "Then enlighten me. If Jamal's arrest was justified, why can't you explain the facts without falling back on vague assertions?" Each word was laced with an energy fueled by mounting frustration, the sting of injustice coursing through her veins. A knot in the officer's jaw tightened. A flicker of something, disbelief or annoyance, perhaps both, crossed his features. "Listen, Aisha. I get that you're trying to be an advocate. It's admirable, really. But do not mistake your experience for universal truth." In that moment, something unfurled within her. She watched his face intently, recognizing the familiar defensive posture that those in power often assumed. Anger may have threatened to surface, but she had learned the art of restraint in the military, of channeling adrenaline into something productive. "I don't need to have universal truth to know my brother's life matters. We are not just statistics or stories. This is our reality." Behind her, the audience had started to grow restless but supportive, murmurs of backing early signifying a shift. With the officer's focus entirely on Aisha, she recognized for the first time that she was no longer just a sister fighting for her brother. She was an ally to many. Each person in the room resonated with her truth, hungry for change that had been denied for too long. "Your reality isn't the only reality," he countered, but his words lacked conviction. Aisha noted his slight hesitation, a crack in the armor she had sought to exploit. "Then allow me to introduce you to others who share my reality," she proposed boldly. "Let's create a dialogue that isn't rooted in defensiveness but in understanding." As she spoke, Aisha could feel a transformation occurring, not just in herself, but within the space. A ripple of energy sparked as others began to move closer, echoing her resolve. "What do you say?" She stared him down, the tension electric as she awaited his response, compelled to push past fear. Would he step into the light of accountability, or would he retreat into the shadows of dismissal? The moment lingered, a crossroad potentially forged not just for Aisha, but for the entire Pine Grove community, one where their collective voices could rise against a system designed for silence. She felt a determination solidify inside of her, firming her grip on the reality they all faced together. An unexpected thought broke through. What if this was just the beginning? As the officer opened his mouth to respond, Aisha felt the tide shift once more. The tension was palpable, and her heart raced with the anticipation of what was to come. This was her opportunity to not only reclaim her brother's narrative, but to redefine justice within her community. But it was far from certain, and as the air thickened with expectation, Aisha knew this struggle was interconnected with her path towards self-discovery and empowerment. What would be the officer's answer, and how would it shape the journey ahead for Aisha and her mission for justice? Aisha held her breath, the moment stretching infinitely. suspended between expectation and reality. The officer's expression had shifted, a turbulence brewing beneath his calm exterior. She sensed this might be pivotal, yet fear gnawed at her resolve. Would he recognize her passion as a push for truth, or would he dismiss her as a mere emotional participant in a larger game? His voice finally broke through the tension. I can't promise that everyone involved is willing to have that discussion. Some perspectives are hardened by experience. Aisha bristled at the implication that she might lack the authority to challenge an ingrained system built on long-standing biases. Experience also teaches us that silence and acceptance will only foster further injustices. If you are indeed committed to serving and protecting, wouldn't it be in your interest to understand the stories behind the headlines? Her own voice quivered slightly, betraying the whirlwind of emotions stirring within her. He met her gaze, the fight in her eyes holding him momentarily captive. A sense of urgency surged through her. This was not just about her brother. It was about establishing an enduring truth that might bridge the chasm of misunderstanding that plagued both their worlds. The community needs to be heard. I need you to understand this isn't insubordination. It's about accountability. Aisha pressed on, pivoting away from defensiveness, determined to sculpt her narrative into one of hope and empowerment. The crowd, sensing a shift, edged closer. She hadn't just become an advocate, she was evolving into a force, an engine of momentum fueled by collective frustration and hope. No longer would she stand merely as Jamal's sister, but as a voice for many, including herself. The officer's stiff facade seemed to crumble, a mixture of confusion and something akin to recognition passing over his features. You're talking about a lot of feelings, Aisha, but feelings don't dictate facts. Feelings are the catalyst for facts. Our experiences shape our realities. It's not just a matter of fact-checking, but listening, truly listening, she challenged. Her heart pounded faster, a primal mix of adrenaline and passion coursing through her. In that critical moment, Aisha remembered her training. Each engagement on the battlefield had taught her how to read intentions, how to navigate dire situations. She understood now that this discussion transcended personal anger. It was about strategy. She needed to cultivate an environment ripe for understanding, devoid of combative strains. If you step into this dialogue, you might uncover truths that have evaded you. If you truly care about your mission, shouldn't you risk facing uncomfortable realities? His brow furrowed. Aisha held her breath, waiting for the flash of recognition, that flicker of potential acceptance that could herald change. But then she hesitated, swallowed by doubt once more. What if he turned away? What if her attempt to wield her voice as a sword against silence fell flat? She sensed the crowd leaning in, their anticipation mirroring her own. Each face held hope for answer, a call for change. Aisha steeled herself, recognizing an emerging strength. She was ready to amplify the narrative. Every day, we interact within a system that desensitizes empathy. I refuse to let Jamal become another statistic. At what point will you allow yourself to be affected by our truths instead of hiding behind the institutional fact that doesn't serve us? The officer crossed his arms, weighing his response heavily, and Aisha realized she had pushed him to a corner. Not just him, but the very foundation of entrenched beliefs. This was where her battlefield experience kicked in. She must be prepared for resistance. As she stood there, determined and trembling with both fear and purpose, she embraced this vulnerability. Was it possible that what had begun as a singular plea for justice could propel her into something larger? Then she felt a familiar inkling, a need to extend her reach. If justice is about protecting everyone, then let's open that gate. I'll bring others like me, show you our lives firsthand. Will you join me? The air shifted, fracturing not just the officer's stance, but the very fabric of the conversation. Could he truly bridge the gap? Aisha's heart raced as she awaited his answer. Would this lead to a new understanding, or would it deepen the divide? Determined, she paced slowly, reflecting on how far she had come from simply being a sister in pain to a warrior for change. But the true journey, she realized, was just beginning, one that would demand more than she had ever imagined. What would the officer decide, and how would Aisha navigate the aftermath of that pivotal moment? Aisha's heart pounded as she scanned the officer's face for any sign of a breakthrough. The tension in the air was palpable. The crowd inched closer. This was the moment she had envisioned, where reckless emotion intertwined with piercing clarity. "There's power in vulnerability," she reminded herself, and yet uncertainty clawed at her. The officer shifted uneasily, as if holding a weight that pressed down on him, tethering him to the spot. His silence was oppressive, a chasm of doubt that Aisha felt keenly. "This isn't just about narratives," she pressed, her voice steady, despite the storm inside her. "It's about humanity and the real consequences of your actions or inactions." "You think it's as simple as a change in dialogue?" His voice broke slightly, exposing a hint of fatigue. "Yes," she answered firmly. "It starts with conversations that challenge established norms." Aisha's resolve fortified as she realized that every word was a step toward unraveling the past and shaping a new present. She recalled her own history, the night spent anxiously pacing, inundated with worry for Jamal. Each sleepless hour had solidified her purpose. She wasn't merely demanding justice for her brother. She was forging a path for others, lost in silence. "Look," she continued, summoning a quiet ferocity, "I don't want this to be about blame. I want it to be about understanding. This community is so much more than the headlines." The crowd held their breath, waiting for the officer to respond, and Aisha felt a strange connection with them all. It was raw energy, the electricity of shared hope. She was no longer just their voice. She was part of something greater. "What do you expect me to do?" he asked, still grappling with the gravity of Aisha's plea. "I expect you to listen." The words poured from her soul, genuine and unfiltered. "Bring more of your colleagues into this discussion. Let us tell our stories. Imagine if you could walk a mile in our shoes, see the world through our eyes." His guard began to slip as his brow furrowed deeper, wrestling with the implications of her words. It struck Aisha then. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about a system, a network built on years of mistrust and misunderstanding. She had breached the wall of silence, but the real battle lay ahead. A flicker of determination ignited within her. What if instead of assuming we could build empathy, instead of reinforcing divides, we could foster community? As she spoke, she pieced together a vision in her mind. A community forum where voices like hers could rise, clashing yet harmonious. She could orchestrate a gathering where tales of hardship could convert anger into understanding. It was ambitious, but vital. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all their gazes. "But it begins with you. You have the power to shift perspectives. Will you help?" The officer looked conflicted, as if a door had been opened, but he hesitated at the threshold. She wondered if this meeting would be the catalyst to break the cycle of dread that hung over them, or deepen the rift. Now Aisha grappled not just with her aspirations. She was also confronted with a daunting realization. What if he refused? What if his reaction was one of dismissal rather than an eagerness to engage? Panic surged within her briefly, but she steeled herself again, realizing that her worth was not contingent upon his acceptance. "What happens if we don't engage, officer? More pain, more walls." He closed his eyes briefly, as if envisioning the flashpoints she hinted at. When he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper surprised her. "I'll think about what you've said." Thinking is a start, but what about action? Her question hung heavy. As they locked eyes, a fleeting moment of understanding passed between them. This was the edge of change, yet it opened the floodgates to questions unaddressed, fears undiscussed. Aisha turned to the crowd, the energy swirling around her. This isn't the end of our dialogue, it's just the beginning. And she realized, with ironclad clarity, that her evolution into a leader would not only be about words exchanged, but fierce courage to confront the obstacles in her way. Before she could quell the wave of emotions surging within, she laid out a challenge as a way forward. Let's establish a meeting. I'll gather voices eager to share their truths with you. Will you be there? Their eyes held a shimmer of resolve. The officer nodded, guarded but willing to step forward into the unknown. As Aisha walked away, she felt both exhilarated and apprehensive. This encounter had pulled her into uncharted territory. Her quest was not just for her brother's justice, but for transformative growth. She had lit a spark, but would it be enough to ignite genuine change? What lay ahead as she organized this meeting would test not only her resilience, but also her evolving identity. The next phase was upon her, and every ounce of strategic acumen would be required to ensure it did not fizzle out before it bore fruit. Would she summon the courage to face the repercussions of her choices? Aisha returned home, the echoes of the day's confrontation fresh in her mind. The shadows of doubt danced at the peripheries of her thoughts, threatening to dim the light of her triumph. She sat at her kitchen table, a space once filled with laughter, but now heavy with anticipation and worry. She picked at a paper, jotting down notes for the upcoming meeting, each word imbued with her resolve. Planning began to consume her thoughts as she mapped out the potential outcomes. What if the officer brought allies who were dismissive? What if they were pressed for time and uninterested in the deeper discussions? Aisha's heart raced at the complexities involved in engaging with a system steeped in history, a network of silence and misunderstanding that had persisted for too long. To counter the uncertainty, she applied her strategic mind, thinking like a chess player. She had spent too much time as a piece on someone else's board. Now she would take on the role of the queen, boldly moving across the board to control the game. Systematic change required calculated moves, and a well-thought-out agenda for the meeting was imperative. Aisha envisioned the mix of faces she would gather, the yearning young voices ready to share their stories, and the elders who had weathered far too much in silence. Each had a part to play. But what would she say first? Would she start with her brother's story or reach broader, delving into the collective pain of loss and injustice? Suddenly her phone buzzed, yanking her from her thoughts. A text from her best friend Zara flashed on the screen. "Are you okay? Heard about today. Proud of you." The pride in those words sent warmth through Aisha, yet the weight of the task at hand quickly returned. If only the road ahead was as simple as friends' admiration. She needed wisdom more than consolation, wrestling with the urgency of the moment. Would she falter when faced with confrontation? Could she remain steadfast, both for herself and for the community she began to represent? Remembering the officer's face, his flickering gaze framed with uncertainty, Aisha took a deliberate breath, grounding herself. Drawing on the stories she had heard in the neighborhood, she began to pen them down. She was transmuting fear into narrative, not just for herself, but for the many who had suffered unnoticed. Each fragment of despair transformed into palpable connections that would bridge the gap between two worlds. She realized her role was more than that of a leader. It was of a storyteller, weaving threads of shared experiences into a tapestry of empathy. Within this process, she unearthed her own strengths, a skill she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Aisha was a natural orator, the kind whose words reached the depths of resentment and ignorance. This skill had been honed through her experiences, through every painful recounting of injustice, every silent prayer for change. As she practiced her delivery in front of her reflection, revising her words for clarity and impact, a new fire ignited. The meeting was more than just an appeal for understanding. It was an opportunity for transformation. But then, lurking in the back of her mind, unease remained. Was she truly ready for the repercussions of pushing boundaries? Each bravely spoken story carried the risk of backlash, of unleashing the storm of resistance from those who preferred the status quo. Despite this, Aisha knew she wouldn't back down. Uncertainty could not control her path. It would push her toward radical honesty and the authenticity necessary for dismantling long-standing fears. She needed to summon every ounce of courage and resilience she possessed. As she finalized her notes, a surge of clarity washed over her. This was her moment. But just as she resolved to embrace what lay ahead, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. The message read, "You'll regret speaking out." Chills raced down her spine as the weight of potential hostility crashed over her. The journey ahead was far more than just a meeting. It was a battle line drawn in a war that demanded unwavering strength and determination. What had she started? Her heart raced with both fear and adrenaline. Would she back down, or would she rise to confront whatever darkness lay ahead? Aisha's heart thundered in her chest, the cryptic warning reverberating in her mind like an ominous drumbeat. She had braced herself for fierce discussions, but the veiled threat hung heavy in the air like a storm cloud, darkening her resolve. That message was a reminder. It was no longer just about sharing stories, but about standing up against something far greater. A confrontation with herself loomed. Sitting still at her kitchen table, she slowly folded the paper that contained her neatly scrawled notes, heart racing. Until now, she had described herself as an advocate. But in moments like this, she grappled with the labels that seemed too weak for what she was becoming. A revolutionary, perhaps, if the term was ever to touch her identity. Aisha struggled against the whispers of fear that slithered through her mind. There was power in honesty, but every act of honesty could be met with resistance, whether through words or actions. She drew a deep breath, forcing herself to ground her thoughts, absorbing the weight of her commitment. How could she convert fear into advocacy? Aisha remembered a quote from a local leader she admired: "Courage is fear-walking." And while fear nibbled at the edges of her determination, she needed to embrace it. It was a signal that she was moving toward something important. That night, she couldn't sleep. Scenes from her life replayed in vivid, unsettling detail. Each memory, from the joyous laughter at family gatherings to the tense silences during conversations about race, cultivated the roots of her mission. Aisha realized that the drive came from both pain and resilience. The tapestry of shared experiences she yearned to weave was reflective not only of her own story, but of countless others who had endured and remained silent. This collaboration of individual pains translated to strength when channeled correctly. Aisha grabbed her laptop, needing to take action while the fire burned brightly within her. She brainstormed, crafting a strategy. Simple layers of approaches flowed onto the screen as her fingers raced. First, she would set the stage for an open dialogue, inviting others to share their narratives. Then she would intertwine the stories with factual data of injustices, showcasing patterns that went beyond individual cases, thus underlining systemic issues. She would create a multifaceted approach, not unlike pieces of a puzzle coming together to form a coherent picture of the reality many were too afraid to confront. With each keystroke, Aisha unearthed her own capabilities, recognizing the impact her voice could deliver if orchestrated correctly. In that moment of clarity, she crafted a vision, an inclusive community where stories became the foundation for real change. No more would they suffer in fragmented silence. It was time to amplify their cries. As she reviewed her notes for the umpteenth time, she caught sight of that ominous warning again. "You'll regret speaking out." The words didn't fester with fear anymore. They stoked her determination. She envisioned transforming that threat into her rallying cry. At last, she hesitated before hitting send. This wasn't just about the meeting. It was about becoming a conduit for truth, an emblem of resilience. What if her courage could ignite a fire that spread beyond her community? Suddenly her phone buzzed once more, breaking her focus. It was Zara, her support network in this endeavor. "Are you still up? We can't let them silence you. I'll be with you every step." Aisha smiled softly, knowing she wasn't alone, but the looming shadows of countering forces reminded her of the stakes involved. Tomorrow would be the day she stepped into uncertainty head first. She would confront the complexities of pushback. Deep within her, a new strength was rising, preparing her for the confrontation she never anticipated. But was her resolve strong enough to weather the storm, or would she be swept away by the tide of opposition? The dawn's light would soon break, guiding her through this odyssey, and as it approached, she was filled with anticipation and trepidation alike. The next step awaited, and Aisha was about to discover whether her steps would lead to triumph or turmoil. As she gazed into the mirror, a sense of urgency took root. She would emerge transformed by the battle, but at what cost? The sun barely crested the horizon the following morning, casting a soft glow that illuminated Aisha's bedroom. She blinked against the light, the shadows of her anxieties lingering despite the new day. Today she would address the council, a pivotal moment that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She had spent the night rehearsing her thoughts, her heart beating with equal parts hope and dread. As she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, she took a moment to assess her reflection. The determination in her eyes was profound, but there was an underlying fear wrapped tightly within her chest. Would they listen? Would they push back? Each question twisted her stomach into knots. Aisha splashed water on her face, letting the cool sensation anchor her in the present. Choosing her outfit became a careful act of intention. She settled on a crisp white shirt, a symbol of clarity, paired with tailored slacks that embodied professionalism. She needed to represent strength and confidence, even if she felt like a facsimile of herself beneath the fabric. The reflective surface showed not just her attire, but her mission, a commitment to voice the unspoken, to demand justice. On the drive to the meeting, she focused on her breath, channeling every ounce of nervous energy into resolve. Each inhale filled her with purpose. Each exhale released lingering doubt. Perhaps it was the sheer ridiculousness of it, but she found strength in processing her thoughts aloud, speaking them into existence like a mantra. "I am not afraid. I will not be silenced." Arriving at the community center, she felt the weight of the building's history settle on her. This was a place where stories had been shared, both of pain and resilience. As she stepped inside, the air was charged. Supporters gathered, their chatter weaving a tapestry of shared resolve. Zara found her almost immediately, greeting her with the sort of assurance that steadied her nerves. "It's going to be okay," Zara said, squeezing Aisha's shoulder gently. "You're ready for this." With that support, Aisha felt a flicker of optimism. She needed to believe that the tide would turn in favor of truth. As they took their seats amid the murmurs of conversation and concerned faces, Aisha surveyed the room. Expectation hung thick as everyone awaited her words, and the faces blurred long enough for her to almost forget their implications. Yet, there it was, the reminder of the ominous warning still echoing in her ears. When her name was called, she stood, heart pounding, and approached the podium. The microphone was cold beneath her fingertips, but she took a steadying breath and began. "Thank you all for being here today. I'm standing before you because our truth matters. Too long have we faced injustices in silence and accepted the narratives that diminish our voices." As she spoke, Aisha exposed the raw edges of her pain and the stories she had collected. Each account was not merely an anecdote. Together they became a clarion call for justice. There was hesitation in the room. She couldn't tell if it was discomfort, understanding, or denial reflecting back at her. It staggered her for a moment, but she pressed on, intertwining palpable facts with the narratives of those who had suffered. With each word, she dug deeper into the systemic issues that had been allowed to flourish unchecked, awakening a collective consciousness among her listeners. She felt the shift, the spark igniting within the audience. Yet, a part of her held back. The lingering worry of confronting the opposition loomed like a shadow, awaiting its moment to strike. As she concluded her speech, a nervous excitement coursed through her. Aisha could practically sense the air thickening with anticipation, but before she could bask in the warmth of a compelling performance, she remembered the stakes. There were threats lingering just outside this sacred space. The silence that followed felt unnervingly heavy, and then came a voice from the back, slicing through her moment of hope. "You think you can change anything? This is a waste of time." The confrontation came like a cold wave, chilling excitement into dread. Aisha's resolve rippled through her one more time, and she recognized this moment would define her. The stakes had just heightened. Her voice would soon clash with opposition, and as she locked eyes with the challenger, she understood with startling clarity this was the catalyst for her evolution. The battle was just beginning, and as Aisha stepped forward, she braced for the fight she never knew awaited her. Would the confrontation empower her budding revolutionary spirit, or would it expose her vulnerabilities for all to see? Aisha stood firm, her posture reflecting the steadfastness she had cultivated throughout her journey. The voice from the back, the sneering doubt, seemed to ricochet through the hall, yet it ignited a spark within her that pushed aside the remnants of fear. "This isn't just a waste of time, this is about change, and change begins with us confronting uncomfortable truths," she replied, her voice cutting through the tension with unexpected authority. As the murmurs of the crowd surged, Aisha seized the moment to redirect the flow of discourse. Every dismissive comment only reinforces why we must engage here today. You have the power to turn away, but we have the legitimacy of lived experience. Our reality remains waiting, unacknowledged, while we grapple with pain and injustice that impact our lives daily. Her words hung in the air like an unbroken promise, and as she scanned the crowd, Aisha noticed subtle shifts in expressions, hesitation giving way to contemplation, skepticism yielding to curiosity. For the first time, she saw potential movement among her peers. They had gathered under the banner of purpose, and in this unity she felt a renewed ember of hope ignite. The council members began to murmur among themselves, exchanging glances that conveyed an unspoken recognition. A palpable shift unfurled in the energy that surrounded her. Their potential as a community suddenly felt tangible, a rallying cry against the pain that previously shackled them. "I can't promise that our stories will yield fast change, but if we embrace vulnerability, if we start here together, we can establish a dialogue that holds everyone accountable," she continued, her voice gathering strength. "What we're fighting for isn't just justice for Jamal. It's the right for every person here, every story, every experience to be validated and heard. This is a call for understanding, not just for justice, but for a vision of a future where trust can flourish." The doubts that had plagued her began to unfurl like the clouds breaking apart under the sun's rays. She noted several nods in agreement. The crowd was leaning into her words. It was a revelation. She was no longer merely a soldier on a singular mission. She had transformed into the embodiment of their collective voice, a convener of change. But then came the officer she had confronted the previous night, his presence a reminder of the stakes involved. "No one can change the system alone, Aisha," he interjected, the weight of authority in his voice. "What you're asking is monumental, and conflict will ensue. This hasn't just been a capricious decision to uphold the law, it's a historical framework." Aisha took a breath, realizing that even the challenge posed illuminated the truth she sought to uncover. "I understand that. But how many more injustices will we endure while waiting for systems to decide to change? Accountability begins with conversations that whisk aside the tradition of silence. If we refuse to confront the uncomfortable truths, how do we ever expect to emerge stronger? His eyes lingered, struggling against her bravery. Aisha could sense divisions subsiding. It's time we all take ownership of our roles, including law enforcement. There are commonalities here that could create a dialogue led by shared humanity rather than by pressing authority. A moment of stillness reigned before the previous speaker piped up again, this time with less venom. "You might be right," he conceded, the atmosphere shifting palpably toward openness. "And it's become painfully clear that we can't keep ignoring the fault lines that fracture our community." A surge of energy reverberated throughout the hall, and as the tension pivoted, Aisha felt a new resolve emerging. A rousing encouragement sparked in the hearts of those assembled. They were ready to unite their voices in this fight for justice. They would not allow fear to govern them. As discussions ensued, Aisha didn't stop to bask in her growth. She launched herself into the conversations like a flame igniting a brush fire, challenging preconceived notions, encouraging sharing experiences, and calling upon the gathered voices to rise together. It wasn't just her brother's case, it was about everyone grappling with losses that needed acknowledgement. Over the ensuing weeks, the energy of the meeting burgeoned into a movement. Aisha became the connector, collaborating with activists, mentoring youth, and even bridging difficult conversations with local law enforcement. She had set the groundwork for continuing dialogues, both heart-wrenching and healing, among those once polarized in their understandings of justice. Finally, opportunities emerged for further affiliations with organizations that believed in restoring faith and challenging misconceptions. The ripple effect of her passionate confrontation extended into real, tangible partnerships. Aisha secured a slot on the community board, advocating for not only her brother, but for systemic changes that would honor each voice. As she stood before the board one day, reviewing the progress they had made, Aisha reflected on how far she had come. A vulnerable sister turned fierce advocate, pushing against fear and skepticism. The growth was undeniable. She had transformed careers from soldiering alone into serving the purpose of transformative dialogue. Closing her eyes for a moment, she imagined young faces inspired by the courage she'd displayed. Aisha had become a beacon of resilience and empowerment, someone paving pathways for a newer, more inclusive understanding of justice. To think, she mused, it had all begun with a choice to stand firm amid shadows and uncertainties, and in that realization she knew she had finally reclaimed not only her brother's narrative, but also her own identity, forged from struggle into strength. Gathering her courage, Aisha made her mark on the board's agenda, ready to continue the quest for justice and community healing. She stood tall now, solid and empowered, a leader in her own right, unbounded by fear, and in that moment she urged those present to grasp for change, not only for themselves, but for the world they wished to see. This was her achievement. Now you need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to support the channel. This is the moment to show your commitment to stories of personal overcoming and transformative change.